I'm sorry, each one of those coins is a thylakoid membrane, and the stack is called a granum. Okay? So it's a whole bunch of individual waves organized in a granum that are all contiguous with each other. Again, importantly, what we're doing is we're creating compartments. We have an inner compartment and we have an outer compartment. And those compartments are going to become important when we talk about the process of photosynthesis. And why is the thylakoid wavy like that? Again, it's the same answer, right? Increased surface area. The more surface area we have, the more surface area plants have, the more proteins that can convert solar energy into chemical energy. And more importantly, lots of space for a really important molecule called the chlorophyll molecule. And the chlorophyll molecule is just a little solar antenna. It picks up photons as they fly around in space. Like the mitochondria, the chloroplasts also have their own DNA. All right, so we need to talk a little bit about which evolved first. So we believe that cellular associations with mitochondria and chloroplasts are a product of something called endosymbiosis. So symbiosis means to live together, and endo means inside. So really what this means is we have one organism living inside of another organism. We know some examples of endosymbiosis, right? I mean, parasites are a good example of an endosymbiotic relationship. There it's not mutualistic, it's parasitic. One is definitely benefiting at the cost of another. But there are other relationships that are mutualistic, where one organism is living inside of another. Think about our internal gut flora, our bacteria that are helping us digest things, right? That's a good thing. So we think that an association with chloroplasts and mitochondria evolved as a product of some endosymbiotic event. The question is, what did that endosymbiotic event look like? And there are two potential hypotheses, and there is no correct answer, just two competing hypotheses. The first of which is, it could have been a predatory event. That there was some eukaryotic-like cell that didn't have an association with either mitochondria or chloroplasts. And it saw a bacterium that looked like a mitochondrion or a chloroplast, and it thought, I'm going to eat that. And so it did. But then that mitochondria-like bacterium just set up housekeeping inside that cell and began to live inside the cell. And eventually, they began to benefit from one another. One tried to eat the other to begin with, but ultimately they had a mutualistic relationship in which resources are shared and a safe harbor is provided for the mitochondria. Alternatively, it could have been a parasitic event where the mitochondria-like organism said, that looks like a really good place to live, about some eukaryotic early cell. And so it moved inside. And ultimately, that eukaryotic cell that was being parasitized by the bacteria-like, or the mitochondria-like bacteria, started taking advantage of its parasite. Either of those two events could explain how it is we got mitochondria and chloroplasts inside of us. Why do we think that it's an endosymbiotic event, that at one point they were two disparate cells that eventually became one cell? The answer is, very much like bacteria, both mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA. And they replicate very much like bacteria do. So they look and behave a lot like bacteria. In fact, there are still bacteria that look almost identical to this. They don't live inside a cell. They're just like free-floating cellular mitochondria. So I have a question for you. We know that all organisms have mitochondria. Some organisms have chloroplasts. So which do you think evolved first? An association with mitochondria or an association with chloroplasts? And why do you think that?
Like chloroplasts, because I think plants are older, they've been around longer.
I like the way you're thinking about it, because if you look at the way that evolution has occurred and the movement onto land from that primordial soup, the first things to invade land were plants, for sure. So they seem like a pretty primitive, ancient lineage. Other thoughts? Dissenting views? You're with her? Max with her? Okay. I like it. In actuality, though, you're right with the opposite. It's actually the mitochondria that evolved first. And I'll show you why we think that is so. So, again, the important bit of information here is that all organisms have an association with mitochondria. Plants have both, mitochondria and chloroplasts. Only plants have chloroplasts, though. And so if we were to draw a really rudimentary evolutionary tree, what this shows is common ancestry and then a divergence point between two disparate groups of organisms, animals and plants. And we're going to use these as really broad, generic terms, animals and plants. Anything that's animal-like is over here. Anything that's plant-like is over here. So plants are going to consist of like algae and crap like that, and animals are going to consist of protists and fungi and things like that. And I'm going to draw a similar tree over here. Are you guys familiar with the idea of Occam's razor? It's totally misused, and I'm sure biologists misuse it as well. But in essence, what it says is the simplest explanation is generally the correct explanation. So if we could take like a theoretical route between points A and B, it's going to be the shortest linear route, right, that we're going to want to take instead of this convoluted route that goes out and about. So if chloroplasts were to evolve first, that would perhaps look something like this, where we had an association with chloroplasts and some common ancestor, right? So chloroplast evolution right here. And those chloroplasts are going to be carried up into the plants. And because the common ancestor has them, they should be carried up into the animals as well. We'll take care of that in just a few minutes. Additionally, we need to have the evolution of mitochondria. And maybe that came subsequent to the chloroplasts, right? What that does is it really explains nicely how it is that plants have both the mitochondria and the chloroplasts, right? Because it's just a carryover from that common ancestor. But what has to happen is animals that have the mitochondria have to lose the chloroplasts. So how many evolutionary steps does that take? It takes 1 to evolve, 2 to evolve, and then 3 to lose. So that takes 3 steps. Does that make sense? Okay. Alternatively, what if something happened like this, where we have mitochondria evolution here, and that's going to explain this phenomenon nicely, right? Because they both have mitochondria. But then subsequent to the split, we have the evolution of chloroplasts right here. How many evolutionary steps does that take? 1, right? Evolution, 2 evolutionary steps. So because this is a simpler explanation, we tend to believe that this is correct, that the evolution of mitochondria occurred prior to the evolution of chloroplasts. Okay? You okay with that idea? Could you guys replicate that in the exam? I'm glad. I might ask which evolved first in association with the chloroplast or the mitochondria, and explain why you think that's correct.
Could you say the
I'm sorry, I'm going to walk right in front of you. Adam.
evolutionary steps one more time? Because the one on the left has 3 and the one on the right has 2.
So,
Can you just like point and show me? I wasn't paying attention when you pointed and pointed on the screen. Sorry, so I was like, what?
That's okay.
Where's the 3?
so if I was to explain this, I would replicate these diagrams, and I would say evolutionary step 1,
Okay.
evolutionary step 2,
Okay.
loss of chloroplasts, evolutionary step 3.
Mm-hmm.
And then on this one, I would say evolutionary step 1 and evolutionary step 2,
Okay.
just as a simpler explanation. Okay. How do you guys feel about that? Pretty good? I'm glad. Okay, we're going to move away from membrane-bound organelles and start talking about the skeletal structure of the cell. So as I said, you can really think about cells as an analogous structure to our bodies, right? All the things that happen inside our bodies have to happen inside a cell as well. And that includes a skeleton. Cells have a shape, and they have to be able to maintain that shape. Now, there are 3 cytoskeletal elements that I'm going to want you to be familiar with. And they are going to be associated with some proteins. They're going to have their own function, their own structure, and be associated with a type of motor protein to accomplish the things that they're supposed to accomplish. So are y'all okay if I erase that stuff over there? Again, because I'm going to write our 3 cytoskeletal elements up. Okay, so these are going to be organized from the smallest elements up to the largest elements. The first cytoskeletal element are called the microfilaments. So these are all protein fibers. And they're called protein fibers because they each consist of a protein. So the microfilaments. The microfilaments are the smallest, and their structure is repeating subunits of the actin protein. They're also called actin filaments because that's the protein that they consist of, is actin. And that actin, they're 2 globular proteins that are stuck together, and they form a helix or a spiral in space.
So, can you repeat that?
You betcha. So the actin filament consists of 2 actin subunits. And this is, I don't know if you can see it very easily on the board. I'm gonna shut the lights off just really quickly so I can point this out. Can all in the back see that any better? It's a light green, which is unfortunate. But really, it consists of 2 little actin subunits that are stuck together to other actin subunits in a long strand. And those 2 actin subunits end up spiraling in space, like that. And a helix. And I can't really draw the helix very well, but if I was to flatten that helix out, it would look like this. Each one of those little globs, each one of those little circles, is an actin protein. It's called an actin dimer, actually. It's a whole bunch of these little actins all stuck together that spiral in space. Now, actin filaments, or microfilaments, their function is for amoeboid movement. And that'll make more sense in just a minute. You guys ever looked at amoebas under the microscope? If not, I hope to do that on Tuesday. Hopefully we'll have some amoebas. But they're just like, I mean, if you were to spit on the ground and your spit was to become alive and start moving around, that's what an amoeba is. I know it's disgusting. But it's just a cell that kind of like oozes. And the way that it oozes is it extends out a part of its body called a pseudopod, and then it just kind of like contracts into that pseudopod like this. And the way that it pushes out like that is it has these little microfilaments just below the plasma membrane that extend out. It just pushes out against the plasma membrane and it makes this projection. And you'd be like under your shirt pushing your finger out like that. That would be pseudopod. Okay, so the motor proteins because these are just filaments, right? They're just structures, they're just proteins, and they can't move by themselves, so they have to be associated with some protein that helps them move. And the motor protein is called myosin. Now, in actuality, they're not just responsible for amoeboid movement. When we move our bodies like this, that's actin filaments inside our bodies and myosin proteins that are allowing to move our bodies about. That's how I dance as well. And that's what accomplished it. It's actin filaments with myosin proteins. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of blast through these really. I know that we're getting short on time. I'll stop right here. And we'll come back to the cytoskeleton and pick up with actin filaments again, just to make sure that there is no confusion. Do you guys have any questions right now about these? Okay, then I will see you in laboratory tomorrow at 2:30. Please read the lab before you come. There'll be a lot.